Jai Hind. I am Dr. Sweety Agarwal. I am from the Department of Applied Sciences and Humanities. My subject is Technical Communication and the code for this subject is KAS 301 and KAS 401. Today, I will discuss barriers to communication, that is a part of Unit 1. Unit 1 is Fundamentals of Technical Communication. By the end of this lecture, you will be able to explain the communication process, to describe the communication barriers, to explain the classification of barriers to communication, explain how to overcome communication barriers. Communication is a process beginning with the sender who encodes the message and passes it through some channel to the receiver who decodes the message. Communication is fruitful if and only if the messages sent by the sender are interpreted with same meaning by the receiver. If any kind of disturbance blocks any step of communication, the message will be destroyed. Due to such disturbances, people face severe problems. So what is communication? Let us understand what is communication. Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information by speaking, writing or using some other medium. This definition has been taken from Oxford English Dictionary. So what is communication? Communication is the successful conveying or sharing of ideas and feelings. The word communication has been derived from the Latin word communicare, which means to impart or to participate or to transmit. The word communicare has been derived from the root communis, which means to take common or to share. So communication is a process through which two or more people exchange information, ideas, thoughts, emotions in such a way that each gain a common understanding of the intended message. Communication is simply the act of transferring information from one place, person or group to another. Communication involves at least one sender, a message and a recipient. This may sound simple, but communication is actually a very complex subject. The transmission of the message from sender to recipient can be affected by a huge range of things. These include our emotions, the cultural situation, the medium used to communicate, and even our location. The complexity is why good communication skills are considered so desirable by employers around the world. Accurate, effective, and unambiguous communication is actually extremely hard. Communication is one of our basic needs. We require to communicate with many people for personal and professional purpose. But while communicating, we may face many hurdles or problems. Sometimes the message is not passed properly or gets lost. There are chances of misunderstanding between the sender or the receiver. Sometimes language used in the communication is not understood properly. This results into communication breakdown or communication failure. There are many reasons behind the problems in the communication process. You can understand that effective conversation can only take place when the various communication barriers have been overcome. Let us study the communication barriers in detail. The term barrier means hurdles, hindrance, and obstacles. Thus, barrier to communication imply hurdles or obstacles on the way of transmission of message from the sender to the receiver. Any obstacle or problem in the process of communication which hinders the process of communication is called barrier. Barriers are part of process of communication. Whenever we are communicating, we encode and decode. We use various channels for passing messages. At any level, at any moment or stage, there can be problems in communication process. Sometimes the sender may not use proper language that the receiver will understand. Receiver may not be able to decode properly. There can be lot of noise in the surroundings which can disturb us. It rarely happens that barriers do not arise in the communication process. Many times barriers arise in the minds of the sender or receiver. The intended messages are not sent to the receiver. Communication is a process of transmitting information. If the information as it is present in the mind of the transmitter is transferred unchanged into the mind of the receiver, we say that a perfect act of communication has taken place. But if some miscommunication occurs either at the level of sender or at the medium or at the receivers, and communication process is hampered. This communication is referred as a barrier to communication. Barriers are obstacles to the process of communication. Barriers to communication can be divided into three major categories. This is the classification of barriers. First one is intrapersonal barriers. Interpersonal barriers, they stem from a person's attitude, behavior, knowledge, education, and personality. Second one is interpersonal barriers. These barriers stem from inappropriate transaction of words between two or more people. Third one is organizational barriers. They refer to barriers in organizational communication. Let us study intrapersonal barriers in detail. All individuals are unique because of differences in perceptions, experiences, education, culture, personality, etc. Each of us interprets the same information in different ways as our thinking varies. These differences lead to certain inbuilt or intrapersonal barriers. Let's explore all the causes listed here that lead to intrapersonal barriers. First one is wrong assumptions. Second, varied perceptions. Third one, differing background. Fourth, wrong inferences. Fifth, impervious categories. Sixth, categorical thinking. Now we will discuss wrong assumptions. Wrong assumptions are generally made because the sender or the receiver does not have adequate knowledge about each other's background or entertains certain false concepts which are fixed in his or her mind. Sometimes the speaker does not realize that backgrounds, education, and experiences of different people can be different. Many barriers stem from wrong assumption. For example, when a doctor tells his patient that he has to take some medicine only SOS, it means during an emergency, without knowing whether the patient understands the term SOS, he is creating a barrier to their communication. So, many barriers stem from wrong assumptions. Hence, the doctor has made a wrong assumption about his patient's level of understanding, level of knowledge. SOS, a signal or message that a ship or plane sends when it needs urgent help. Urgent appeal for help. A skilled communicator keeps these issues in mind to prevent them from becoming barriers. To strengthen your skills as a communicator, try to put yourself in the shoes of the receiver. This exercise will prevent making wrong assumptions about the receiver. Next is varied perceptions. Varied perceptions. This is when different individuals hold different viewpoints about the same situation. We all know that the story of 6 blind men and their description of an elephant. The elephant was perceived by each man as a tree, a snake, a wall, a rope, etc. Like this, you can see here. None of the blind men were wrong, as a part of the elephant body touched by each man compared well with various objects they named. This is how an individual perceives reality. The best way to overcome this barrier is to step back and take a wider perspective of the whole situation. So individuals perceive situations in different ways. It is the basic tendency of people to interpret others and perceive them in a different way. Next is differing backgrounds. People vary in terms of their education, culture, language, environment, etc. Like one example is given here. A computer company representative would not make much sense to a group of doctors if in his presentation he goes into details about the hardware aspects of the computer that he plans to install. To be a good communicator, the speaker should know about the background of the audience. One can use that information to construct one's message. No two persons have a similar backgrounds. Even siblings differ in their genetic inheritance. Our background plays a very important role in how we interpret the message. Next is wrong inferences. Wrong inferences is when we assume something without knowing the whole truth. Inferences means something that you think is true based on some information that you have. Wrong inferences are more dramatic than facts and can cause gossip and rumors. They should always be supported by facts. When professionals analyze material, solve problems, and plan procedures, it is essential that inferences should be supported by facts to avoid miscommunication. When presenting inferences, you should always have some evidences. Next is impervious categories. In general, we react positively to information only if it is in consonance with our own views and attitudes. Conversely, when we receive information that does not conform to our personal views, habits, and attitudes, or appears unfavorable to us, we tend to react negatively or even disbelieve it. This is a result of having a closed mind. Such people are called misogynist. So it means a hatred of fear. Misogynist means hatred of fear or intolerance of innovation or change. Some people who are very rigid in their opinions may face problems in communicating effectively. Such people fall into impervious categories because they may not be able accept any deviation from their point of view. So rejection, distortion, and avoidance are three common undesirable and negative reactions to unfavorable situation. Advances in communication and technologies are so rapid today that many people have difficulty in quickly adapting themselves to these developments. Instead of taking advantages of these developments, they help the communication process. They tend to resist and criticize them. These people are known as misogynists. Next is categorical thinking. People who feel that they know it all are called pansophists. They are known as pansophists. This type of thinking exists in people who feel that they know everything about a particular subject and therefore they refuse to accept any further information on that topic. So the clue to detect this barrier in others and ourselves is that use of words like all, always, everybody, everything, every time, and even their opposites like none, never, nobody, and nothing. To avoid this barrier, substitute these words with phrases like in most situations or likely, or we can use this phrase also, it appears to me, or the evidence indicates. We can present our opinion with these phrases. It appears to me or the evidence indicates. If a message contains too many of these words, there is a fair chance of the communication getting distorted. Now we will discuss second type of barrier, that is interpersonal barrier. Intrapersonal barriers stem from an individual's attitudes or habits, whereas interpersonal barriers occur due to the inappropriate transaction of words between two or more people. The two broad categories into which these barriers can be classified are inefficient communication skills and negative aspect nurturing in the climate. The most common reasons for interpersonal barriers are given here: limited vocabulary, incongruity of verbal and non-verbal messages, emotional outburst, communication selectivity, cultural variations, poor listening skills, and noise in the channel. First one is limited vocabulary. Inadequate or insufficient vocabulary can be a major hindrance in communication process. At times, we find ourselves searching for the exact word or phrases that would be appropriate for what we are trying to express. Merely having a wide vocabulary is of no use unless the communicator knows how to use it. In communication, the denotative and connotative meanings of the word should be absolutely clear to the receiver, right? It means, denotative means literary or primary meaning, and connotative means, it means implied meaning or suggested meanings. Should be absolutely clear to the receiver, and therefore one should make constant efforts to increase one's vocabulary by regularly reading a variety of books and listening to your native speakers of the language. So if in your speech or writing or during a speech you are at a loss of words, your communication will be very ineffective. You will leave a poor impression on the audience. Next is incongruity of verbal and non-verbal messages. A communicator should adjust himself to the communication environment. He should think from the angle of the listener and then communicate. Misinterpreted non-verbal communication acts as another barrier to effective information flow instead of enhancing verbal communication. So your facial expressions often conveys a far more vivid message than words. It can substitute for a verbal message. Ignoring non-verbal clues or misinterpreting them can result in the message being completely misunderstood. Thus, one should not only try to accurately measure others' non-verbal clues but also be aware of one's own body language. Non-verbal communication includes facial expressions, the tone and the pitch of the voice, gestures displayed through body language, which is known as kinesics, and the physical distance between the communicators, which is known as proximus. The first impression about people is most often made on the basis of their physical appearance, which significantly affects the quality of communication. So try to improve dress according to the occasion. Next is emotional outburst. Excessive emotional involvement can be an obstacle in communication. Positive emotions such as happiness and excitement also interfere in communication, but to a much lesser extent than negative feelings. Extreme anger can create such an emotionally charged environment that a rational discussion becomes impossible. Messages can be misinterpreted, ignored, or overreacted to by people displaying such behavior. When confronted with such negative behavior, it is essential to avoid reacting. The person displaying these emotions should be calmed down. They should preferably take into a quiet place to try and sort out the problems that cause their emotions to spin out of control. Emotions are an integral part of our being, whether in business or personal encounters. By sharpening self-awareness, intuition and empathy, emotions can help in developing an environment that is highly conducive to good communication. Next is communication selectivity. When the receiver in a communication process pay attention only to a part of the message, he is or she is imposing a barrier which is known as communication selectivity. This happens because he or she is interested in that part of the message which may be of use to him or her. In such a situation, the sender is not at fault. Here, it is the receiver who breaks the flow of communication. Communication selectivity may act as a barrier in written forms of communication as well. While reading any document, if you read only the parts you consider useful, you are posing this barrier. Next is cultural variations. A cultural barrier in communication occurs mainly when communication happens between two different cultural backgrounds. We encounter cultural barriers in everyday life. In the age of globalization and digital media, the whole world is performing and participating on one platform. Here, mutual understandings between communicators are very much important for the effective and fruitful process of communication. Every country has numerous religious practice by its people, so the differences in their values and beliefs are also an example of cultural variation or barriers. Success, whether as a student or as a professional, lies in knowing the business practices, social customs, and etiquette of the particular country one is dealing with. This factor holds good in the area of education as well. You will prove to be a successful communicator abroad during the course of your higher studies if you take pains to understand the culture of the educational campus in which you are studying. Next barrier, that is poor listening skills. A common obstacle to communication is poor listening habits. Hearing is a passive exercise, while listening requires careful attention and accurate decoding of the signals received from the speaker. We should listen when we are the receiver in communication process. Misunderstandings and conflicts can be avoided if people listen to the message with attention. We should remember that listening and hearing are not the same. The various distractions that hinder listening can be emotional disturbance, indifference, aggression, and wandering attention. Next barrier is noise in the channel. Noise interferes greatly in the transmission of signals. Noise is any unwanted signal that acts as a hindrance in the flow of communication. Any interference in the message sent and received leads to the production of noise. Noise here does not mean cacophony, but it refers, or harsh sounds, but it refers to a break in the communication process. It is not necessarily limited to audio disturbances, but can also occur in visual, audiovisual, written, physical, or psychological forms. All these forms of noise communicate extraneous matter which may distract the receiver from the message and even irritate him or her. Now, we will discuss third type of barriers, organizational barriers. Communication barriers are not only limited to an individual or two people, but exist in entire organizations. Every organization, irrespective of its size, has its own communication techniques, and each nurtures its own communication climate. The most common reason for organizational barriers are too many transfer points, fear of superiors, negative tendencies, use of inappropriate media, information overload. Too many transfer stations. Transfer stations are points at which communication is passed. More the transfer stations, more is the likelihood of the message being distorted or lost. The message gets distorted at each level, not because of poor listening, but also because of several other reasons. Transfer stations do serve a purpose, but having too many of transfer station is counterproductive. The more transfer stations or links there are in a communication chain, the greater are the chances of communication barriers that will occur. Some employees may filter out a part of the message which they consider as unimportant. Whatever the reasons for filtering or distorting the message, having too many transfer stations is always a deterrent to effective communication. Next is fear of superiors. In rigidly structured organization, fear of superiors prevents subordinates from speaking frankly. To avoid speaking directly to their boss, some employees may present all the information that they have. It may result in sending partial information. Such practices need to be eliminated by superiors to ensure that communication flows effectively in their organizations. Sometimes, out of fear, employees do not communicate in a proper manner. Negative tendencies. Negative tendencies can arise due to improper management of groups in an organization. There can be a conflict of ideas between group members and non-group members. Right? So these groups may be formal or informal, generally consist of people who share similar values, similar attitudes, similar beliefs, and similar behaviors. We can take an example of extracurricular activities group in class which is opposed by others. So good managers can use these groups for the effective working of the organization. Next is use of inappropriate media. While choosing the medium, you should therefore keep in mind the advantages, disadvantages, and the potential barriers to communication. Some of the common media which are used in organization are graphs, charts, telephones, boards, emails, films, slides, computer presentations, teleconferencing, and video conferencing. Before sending a message, one should consider these factors while choosing the medium: time, cost, type of message, and intended audience. For instance, the telephone would not be an ideal medium for conveying confidential information. Such messages are best conveyed in person, or if the receiver is located in another office, then by speed post. Now I will discuss information overload. One of the major problems faced by organization today is the availability of huge amount of data which the receiver is unable to handle effectively. Receiver should receive only that amount of facts and figures at one time that he or she can absorb. Very often, vital information gets mixed up with too many irrelevant details and therefore goes ignored by the receiver. That's why people ignore the information or the messages. To reduce information overload in an organization, screening of information is mandatory. Major points should be highlighted, leaving out all irrelevant things. Thus, the quality of the information is much more important than the quantity. Now we will discuss how to overcome communication barriers. Some points should be kept in mind in order to overcome different communication barriers. Constructive environment should be creative for expression of ideas. Proper communication channel should be used to transfer idea or information. One should try to maintain a positive attitude while communicating by being open-minded. One should use direct and simple language and avoid words that have more than one meaning. Free flow of information should take place between different levels, both vertically and horizontally. One should try to understand the idea or the information through proper listening. So listening is also required, as I have discussed in today's lecture, before giving feedback. So create an open communication environment. Select the most suitable medium. Your attitude should be positive. Be open, frank, and positive. Use appropriate language. Avoid having too many transfer points. Do not communicate when you are emotionally disturbed. Be aware of the cultural diversity. Use appropriate non-verbal clues, and you need to analyze the feedback. This is the conclusion. There are many barriers to communication, and these may occur at any stage in the communication process. Barriers may lead to your message becoming distorted, and you therefore risk wasting both time and money by causing confusion and misunderstanding. Effective communication involves overcoming these barriers. And conveying a clear and concise message. So the message should be clear and it should be concise. To improve your overall communication skills, you need to be aware of and attempt to minimize any barriers to communication that are present. So constant practice and rigorous implementation of these ideas will help you become an excellent communicator. So with this, I end my lecture, today's lecture. Thank you.